Good morning, folks. Kwanzaa here. So, as you guys know, I'm actually taking a break from Girlfriend Therapy Radio tomorrow to enjoy Turkey Day. But I wanted to come on and I actually wanted to just share a really quick message, and I hope that I don't extend it any longer than it needs to be. But I wanted to talk about a topic that just kind of was in my spirit this morning, and just kind of wanted to share it with you guys and get your thoughts, get your insights, whatever. But the topic that came to mind this morning was, why do people enjoy the fantasy? Like, why do we enjoy the fantasy? Why is it so difficult to embrace the reality, but rather lean more into the fantasy, the untruth, the things that are not real, the things that are not practical, the things that are not true. Like, why is it so easy for us to lean towards those things rather than the truth and the reality? And I'll tell you what, and may sound crazy, but what made me think about that this morning, actually, I had my hair twisted up, and you guys have seen I've been trying to embrace the gray hairs that are growing in my head, like at a rapid pace, faster than I can even keep my hair colored. I talked about that before. So I've been, trying to embrace it. And the other day, yesterday, in fact, I was at work and I was going, walking through the halls to go to another office or whatever. And there was a guy, one of the guys who cleaned the building, and he's always talking though. So when he see me, he was like, "Hey sis, I love what you're doing to your hair." And of course, it brought attention to me. And so, of course, people look. And so now I'm feeling a little insecure. Like, okay, I'm trying to embrace the grays. I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but I certainly don't want people to draw that attention to me in that way. And so that comment, along with this morning, I woke up and someone has sent me an email. And in the email, it talked about the new discrimination, something about, people over 50 and how they're getting, how they're being fired, and I didn't read the article, so I'm not going to pretend to know what it was talking about. But then that made me think like, oh, wow, as I embrace my gray hair, people are becoming more aware of the fact that maybe I'm not as young as I look if I don't have. So like if I cover the crown, I look a lot younger. But when I embrace the gray hair, you can kind of see that I'm a little more mature than perhaps I look without the gray hair. And so, so that incident yesterday, as well as this article that this woman sent me this morning, I kind of was like, I think I'm going to color my hair. And so I took the twist out, I took the braids out, and I'm actually contemplating, haven't made the decision yet, but I'm literally contemplating going to the store to get some hair dye to color my hair. And as I'm standing in the mirror brushing my teeth this morning and all these thoughts are going in my head, I ask myself, like, why? What is it that you're trying to cover up? Are you trying to cover up the fact that you're getting older? Perhaps. Are you trying to cover up the fact that you have gray hair? Well, that's an obvious yeah. But the question really is, but why? What does it matter that you're 46 years old, that you're getting older, that you're experiencing life? Like, isn't that ultimately the goal of life, to live and to live a long life? And I often say, in fact, was just sharing with my daughter yesterday that I want to live to be 102. So how do I expect to live to be 102? And surely I can't expect that I will look like this at 102. Like, that's just not even, I think, what is it, physiologically possible? Because as you guys know, as you age, things start to sag, and despite our best efforts, things are going to sag. People say black don't crack, and that's true, but we do. Like, I can tell even in my neck, I'm getting lines in my neck, and I'm very conscious of that. I can tell with these things on my jaws, and I'm getting very conscious of that. So when I look at myself, I'm seeing all of these subtle changes. And the gray hair is just one of those way more overt changes that I'm going through, that I'm experiencing. And so I had to ask myself the question, and I pose it to you guys as well, the listeners, is why do we enjoy the fantasy? And it sounds like a simple question, but I think one of the most obvious answers is because it helps us to ignore the reality. And so in the fantasy, I can color my hair and I don't have to. That's just one less thing that I have to pay attention to, that is signaling the fact that I'm getting older. And then there are things that I can't do. I can't cover. So, but then you have people who go to the extreme and they begin to do things like facelifts and, Botox injections and all these other things, trying to hold on to youth or hold on to the appearance of youth, because we also know that internally there are things that's changing that we can't cover up with makeup, that we can't cover up with surgeries and all these different things. So the reality is as we get older, there are some physiological changes that take place, and that's a natural progression. Like there's a natural process to growing and to getting older and to living longer. And so when I think about the lie and why, or not the lie, when I think about the fantasy and why we so embrace the fantasy, I think that, one of the most obvious things, like I said, is that it helps us to avoid the reality, but it doesn't erase the reality, because life is still happening. You're still getting older and all these different things. And so then, of course, that thought brought me into other areas of my life. And I remember saying specifically that, once I leave the corporate world and start my own business and be very successful at my own business, as you guys know, I have several business entities that I'm working simultaneously, but I'm still working in corporate America. And so when I'm in meetings and things like that, I feel so unaccomplished because of my gray hairs. And I'm just being honest with you guys. I feel so unaccomplished because of my gray hairs. And so if I'm in a meeting and someone asks me to push a PowerPoint, I feel so degraded because my gray hairs signify that I'm older. But the fact that I'm pushing a PowerPoint makes me feel so unaccomplished. But the reality is, like, this is the fantasy though, right? But the reality is that I'm incredibly accomplished. And if I was to look at my wins, I would say, wow, I'm pretty accomplished. I've accomplished a lot of things in my 46 years, things that I'm incredibly proud of, incredibly pleased to say that I've accomplished, things that I've set out to do that I've actually been able to do. But here you take me in this environment and I feel very unaccomplished. And so again, that's a part of the fantasy. But the reality is that I am fairly, for my, what I set out to do and to set out to be successful, and I am pleased with the things that I've been able to accomplish. And so one of the things I realized as I was thinking about this thing is that, we set up all of these boundaries for ourselves that tell us that we're not enough. And then there's some external stuff that make us feel like we're not enough, that make us feel like we're not good enough. And I thought about social media and how that plays such a huge role in us living in the fantasy. And so, obviously we post the things that the highlights, right? We don't post the lowlights. We don't post the things that are difficult and the things that are tough. And I try to be as transparent as possible. I did on Girlfriend Therapy Radio a few weeks ago. I did, uncut, uncensored, and just kind of share myself. And I really try to be as transparent as possible. So, for example, a lot of people who are, public speakers and, who have platforms and things like this, they would never come on camera without makeup, like they're, made up. And I purposely come on camera without makeup, without the whole, throughout the year for you guys to see me. And so when I think about what areas might I be hiding behind, or might I be, living in a fantasy behind, I'm pleased to say that, I'm very transparent in those areas. I talk a lot about the difficulty of carrying ministry. I talk a lot about, living and growing in real life. I share a lot about my family, my immediate family, my husband and my children. That nucleus is incredibly strong. I was sharing with my husband the other day, and I was being serious, but I was being funny as well. And I was like, the favor of God on our lives is very real. And I think, if anything, excuse me, I probably hide that part of my life because I don't want other people to feel some kind of way about, the true blessings and the true favor that God has over our lives. But that's not what I wanted to come on and talk about. But I was just started thinking about these different areas and these different ways in which we hide behind a fantasy. And my point is that social media doesn't help that, and it doesn't help us to live in a reality, but in fact it helps us to hide in a fantasy a little bit longer. And on the surface, this just seems simple, but there are things that people do every day that is a part of protecting the fantasy that is very damaging to the reality, and not just their reality, but the reality of those who are watching them. And so me knowing that, I'm always I try to be very careful with what I present. And so simple things, I told you, like I said, when I did Girlfriend Therapy Uncut, Uncensored, I talked about the fact that I do censor myself, particularly on social media and in the public. Not a great deal do I censor myself, because my life is not really loose like that, where there are things that I'm doing in the shadows that, ooh, if anybody ever found out. No, I don't. My life isn't that dynamic like that. So the things that I censor most times is my disappointments with things that's going on, either or things that I'm working on, and there, there may be hiccups, there may be tough times or whatever. And so sometimes I censor my disappointment in those areas. As a woman of God, I censor sometimes my disappointment in, how I see what's going on in the faith. But then there are things that I do that don't censor it at all. Like, so I talk a lot about, not a lot, but I've talked about church hurt. I've talked about my experience with church. I've talked about, me stepping away from the physical, institution of church, and why, and what the, ramifications of that are, or were, or whatever. So I'm very transparent in that way, but there are still things that sometimes I don't say, and not for my sake, but for the sake of those who are listening. I know scripture talks about, if something that you do or something that you say or something causes your brother to stumble, then don't do that. And so I try to keep things like that in mind. But one of the things that I see often is just this desire to hang on to the fantasy. And I can identify it in my life, but I can identify it with people out there as well, people on social media as well, people that I encounter every day as well. I years ago did a video, I think, when I was talking about how people try to, especially when they talk to me, and maybe it's not just, maybe this is what people do, but when they try to present themselves, it's like they're presenting themselves and they're not just showing up like, hey, I realize that when I show up like, hey, because people do want to put you on a pedestal, and I jump off that pedestal every time because I'm human. And I am just navigating life just like everybody else. Every day, new opportunities arise. Every day, new challenges arise. I've just committed to living my life. And so today is November the 22nd, it's like 10 o'clock in the morning. And I've not even really began my day. I actually took off today to get prepared to cook and all that stuff. But I haven't even begun my day. So I don't even know what opportunities this day will present to me. And I'm open to it. I'm open for it. I start my day off talking with God and just preparing my spiritual self, and preparing my mental self and my emotional self for the day ahead. And I have no idea what the day will present to me. I'm trusting in God that it will be all good. I'm trusting in God that I am fully equipped and prepared for the day and the things that I may face. But there are little things that, can knock me off my square if I'm not grounded, if I'm not rooted, and if I'm not stable. And so some of those things could be remarks or comments from somebody. I can be driving in traffic and someone cuts me off at the wrong time when, and that irritates me or whatever. Like, there's a lot of things that can happen. And so my point is that when we opt for the fantasy as opposed to the reality, not only does it affect our lives, but it affects, like I said, those who are watching us. And I just want to encourage people as we prepare to exit 2017 and as we prepare to go into 2018, I just want to encourage people to really start cutting out the fantasy and really embrace the reality. And I can't even tell you guys, like I said, I started this talking about these gray hairs. And the fantasy would be honestly me covering those gray hairs, not because because you can't cover your, dye your gray hair, but the fantasy is the ideology or the idea behind it. And so if I'm covering the gray hairs to present this younger, youthful, more, whatever me, so that I can get favor in other areas, like in the workplace, or don't get the questions, or don't get the attention, or whatever the background thinking is with regards to me wanting to color my hair. For you, it could be something else. For you, it could be, it could be anything. And I don't even want to begin to assume or whatever. But for you, you know what it is for you. Whatever that fantasy is that you are latching on to, I just encourage you to let it go. As you prepare to go into a whole new year, just let it go and really become one with the truth of who you are, and become one with just the reality of who you are. And like I said, even when we embrace the fantasy over the reality, it doesn't mean that the reality doesn't exist. And I've shared often about, in fact, I have one of the books here, but one of my favorite authors is M. Scott Peck, and he wrote a great book, The Road Less Traveled. And he wrote subsequent books to that. But if you get a chance to read The Road Less Traveled, it's a great book, and it really talks about this balance between psychology and spirituality, which is really like the take that the approach that he's taken on all of his books, which is a really great way to start looking at life. This whole psychological part, the mind, body, spirit. When we start looking at the mind and the spirit part of it, and how they work together, and how they, and I talk a lot about that as well. But check out his book. But one of the quotes I wanted to share with you guys, and I actually wrote it down. He says that everything that happens in life is there to aid our spiritual growth. Everything that happens in life is there to aid our spiritual growth. That is, to help us grow spiritually. And sometimes, this may sound odd, but sometimes if we look at ourselves and we see that we're getting older, it causes us to look over our lives and see, what have I accomplished over these 46 years? And then you begin to measure your accomplishments with your age, and you have to decide for yourself, is if your accomplishments line up with your age. What do I mean by that? If we're constantly looking at someone else, we can look at someone who is 20 years younger than us, and they may, their business has already started and they've launched and they're very successful in their business. And I may look at myself at 46 years old, still trying to build business, and I may feel like, man, I should have started this years ago. I should have, you can start with that coulda, shoulda, woulda. And I'm not embracing the journey that I'm on. I'm not embracing my life and my life decisions, because the reality is, at 20 something years old, my primary focus, I was married at 20, or 20, yeah, I was married at 20, had my first child at 20. So at 20, I was a mother, I was a wife, and my focus was different. So my focus wasn't even on living my dreams, or, pursuing my passion, or even paying attention to my passion. My focus was on being a wife and being a mother. And by the time I really, cultivated that, and then still, as a mother of adult children, like, you never let that go, but it makes room for other things. So my point is that I can't at 46 look at where someone else is at 21 or 22 or 26 or whatever, and begin to compare my journey with their journey. And I think that's one of the sad things when I think about social media and how it feeds and fuels the fantasy, is that we begin to look at what other people are doing, and it becomes, it overshadows where we are in our own life, and we fail to embrace ourselves, and we fail to embrace our journey and where we're going. And so wherever you are, do an assessment. Like, this is a great time to do an assessment of your life. If you feel like you are right on par to where you feel like you should be, all things considered, then keep moving forward, and set up a plan, and set up a destiny, and, and work that plan, and do what it is that you've set out to do. But if you look at your life and you feel like, man, I should be, maybe I could, or I desire, not even I should be, but I desire to be somewhere else, somewhere greater, somewhere further, then you start develop your plan. Like the response is the same. You assess, you plan, you implement. You assess, you plan, you implement. And that's on every level. And so I hope that makes sense. One of the things a book I'm starting to read, just talking about M. Scott Peck, is his book, The People of the Lie. And I started reading this book years ago, and I want to get back into it because it is a really intense book. And so I'm going to read it. I'll probably share more about it, once I get into it or whatever, share more about it with you guys. But I just wanted to come on and encourage you to let go of the fantasy and really embrace the reality, because in the reality, that's where the strength is. That's where the growth is. That's where the maturity is. That's where the development is. That's where life is. So embrace the reality. So like I said, I won't be doing Girlfriend Therapy Radio this week. So you guys enjoy your turkey day. I will be cooking most of the day, and we'll figure this out, Like I said, I'm not even committed yet. So, we'll figure this out. But that's the beauty of life. That's the reality. And that's what I wanted to share with you guys. So I think sometimes people look at other people and think that, oh, they got it together. Every area of their life is perfect. And I will tell you, I am very pleased with every area of my life. Very, very pleased. Are there things that I desire to, to grow in? Absolutely. Are there things and plans and things in motion for me to grow in those areas? Absolutely. So I just wanted to encourage you guys with that. Like I said, I won't be on the radio this week, but I just wanted to give an encouraging message for you to drop the fantasy, embrace the reality, and as you move into 2018 or out of 2017 into 2018, just set a plan for your life. I love you guys. I pray for each and every one of you, and I pray God's best blessings upon you, upon those you love, and upon the works, all the works of your hands. So blessings to you guys, and until next week, I guess, for Girlfriend Therapy Radio. Blessings.